So my first SCA competition was a huge comp, and it was actually at Croy Valley Foods in Hudson, Wisconsin. They had about 58 cooks for Steak A and Steak B, and this was, like I said, I had hosted SCA comps, but I never cooked at them. So this was my first one cooking, and I definitely learned some things. And Steak A, I ended up placing 4th somehow, and Steak B, I think I was 29th or 28th out of the 58. Can't remember exactly, and don't quote me on that. But I had some good success, but definitely learned some things. So for SCA comp, your first time, like I said, I always scout it out. How much space do I have? Am I gonna have to pull my truck somewhere? I've had my trailer at a couple events, which is nice. It's not a comp trailer or anything. It's just for hauling stuff. Get there early. People arrive super early for these, and I'd rather get there early, grab my spot, get set up without having to rush. Another thing I did was, again, I have a table to the side for my seasonings. The ancillaries, I lay everything out the best I can. Like I'll literally take if these 3 bins are my seasonings for my steak, I'll literally lay them out here in a line on my table so I know 1, 2, 3, and that's how I season. Definitely do that if you can. These are a couple seasonings that I've used. This is actually a ground up seasoning of something else, which me personally, I keep everything in. I'm not to the point of competing. I've done 3 SCA events, but my first one, I literally laid everything out on the counter. If you walked by, you could see exactly what I was using. When I took 4th place in Steak A, people asked what I cooked, but to be honest, I was so surprised I took 4th. I was like, it doesn't even matter what I put on it, and I didn't say it. But you could certainly walk right up to my tent and see exactly what I'm putting on, and I'm not trying to hide it. You'll see some people that are more protective of it, and that's absolutely okay. You know, don't fault them for that. It's just how they want to operate, because people take this very seriously as a competition. So that's okay. But like I said, I put my seasonings out in a row. I'll put my marinade out in a row. Usually I'll have like a bottle like this for my marinade ready to go. And again, timeline. What time do I want to make my marinade? What time do I want to marinate that steak? What time am I going to pull it out? All those good things I put on my timeline. I also put everything out, like my knives. My wife bought me this cool knife roll. I think it fits 6 knives in here. She actually bought this at a great store in Northeast Minneapolis called Eversharp. They're a knife store, really cool. This is a Messermeister brand, I believe, and I just found these wholesale, so we're probably going to bring some of these into the store too. But then I branded it with Anderson Barbecue Supply, of course, because I don't know, why not? I have a business and I need to advertise. But having a knife roll is really nice. It's something I didn't have before, and my wife actually noticed that I was just throwing my knives into bins, and that's a little embarrassing. But now I have this. It's a knife roll. It sits in there nice. Also, put out your twine, your pins. If you can, lay it all out on that prep table, and then you have your other table where you're doing things. I found it to be very easy. Just mentioned it, but it's next here on my list. Know your timeline for how you want to cook your steak. Know how long it takes your charcoal to light. Know how long it takes your cooker to get up to temp. All that sort of stuff is up to you. Don't look at other cooks. My first event at Croy Valley, I was next to Scott Nardi, the 2022 steak champion. I felt a little intimidated. You know, they compete a lot. I guess intimidated isn't the right word, because they were very welcoming. I was even bugging Scott a little bit, asking him some questions. It's a little nerving. And on my other side were our friends Wade and Michelle. They've done tons of these events. So I was like, am I doing things right? Again, don't worry about them, worry about yourself. Everybody has a different timeline. Again, I think I mentioned it for the KCBS, but if you fast forwarded in this video, get a clock, put that clock up as soon as you can, get there so you know what's going on. Make sure it's the correct time. You know, it's one of those universal clocks that reads off of a satellite or whatever. Don't miss your turn-ins. Some of the events, like I said, we've done 3 SCA events now. I've set alarms on my iPhone. Literally the most recent, well, not the most recent, the second event we did, there was a ribs ancillary and a bacon ancillary. I literally had like 15 alarms in my phone just to kind of help me not forget. Having a timeline, again, would help. Steak selection for your first SCA contest. There's lots of videos out there. Try Heart, Spinalis. I've tried them both now, but stick with what you want. It can be kind of intimidating standing in line if you have somebody in front of you that does a lot of these cooks. You're going to look at which steaks they're picking and turning over and looking and not being happy with. Doing some of that's absolutely okay, but stick with what you want. You know, just because they didn't want it doesn't mean it's not good for you. They might have seen something different. They might be looking for different things. So stick with what your plan is and don't change it. Also, the most recent SCA comp I did down in Collinsville, Illinois, I noticed that the steaks were a little bit thicker. Some people will actually cut that steak down a little bit. Moral of the story is the thicker that steak, the longer it is going to be to cook, right? So your sear time might be longer on one side to the other, or longer for this comp because you have a thicker steak. One of the comps we promoted back here in St. Paul, I'm pretty sure our supplier gave us a prime steak and cut them pretty thick. Just notice how thick that steak is, and if you're doing a minute 15 or a minute 25 on each side, it's still going to come. It's going to take longer to come up to temp if it's thicker. Again, the adverse side of that, if it's thinner, it's not going to take as long. So for the first couple events that you're doing, I suggest, and I've learned this the hard way, is focus on an early turn-in time. If that window is 1:30 to 2, I start cooking my steak at about 1:24 because I know I'm cooking at least 5 minutes searing and then coming up to temp. I've learned that I want to get that first steak done. If the steak looks great for me, perfect. Box it, turn it in. If I'm not happy with it, I'll throw it in a Cambro and I'll cook that second steak. That's what I've learned. I made that mistake at my first event. I only decided to cook one steak. I don't even think I prepped the second steak because I was like, it'll be easy. You know, what can go wrong? But in my second and third cooks from then, I've learned that one time when I took my twine off, that spinalis just kind of busted open. Now, if it's below your cut line, it's not supposed to be taken into account for appearance, but still you want to turn in that perfect steak. Start that first steak a little early, or do a whole practice steak, I guess, but me personally, I'm just going to start that first steak early, and if I'm happy with it, get it turned in. It's going to get judged right away. It's not going to sit there. Some people prefer to wait till middle or later in the turn-in time, to each their own. And some people, like I said, only cook that one steak. Some people will cook a practice steak. For me, what I'm going to do in the next few events is, like I said, cook it about 5 minutes early to that turn-in window. If it turns out perfect, great, it's going in. If not, I'll cook that second steak. You can choose to turn that one in, or your first steak will probably be sitting at the right temp. It'll probably stop there. So you can do that as well and turn it in. And our recent one, not my first SCA, but the one in Collinsville, Illinois a couple weeks ago, we had a storm come through for the second steak right at turn-in time. Somehow I managed doneness perfectly on that, but I was actually on to cooking my second steak because I wasn't happy with how my first steak looked. You know, things happen. Sometimes I'll temp things and I'll get two different readings from very close spots, so you might be hitting a fat pocket, but I ramble on. Lastly, with temping your steak is I've temped from the top a couple times and gone right on that grill mark, but then noticed some juice coming out and making the appearance look different. So I've been temping from the side if I can, which I found works a little bit better, but you just got to know where that middle of your steak is too, which is easy enough to do. And again, remember where they're cutting for appearance. So if you have a fat pocket below that appearance line, that shouldn't be taken into account when they're judging that in the SCA tent. So don't worry about that. Just make sure that spinalis is there. I've also cooked a couple tri-hearts, and what I'm doing now is tying that knot on the front side of my steak where I want that steak to be cut open. I've cooked a couple tri-hearts, and I actually had a hard time looking at where the best part of that steak was. So keeping that knot on the front of that steak where you want that in the front of the box helped me figure out that, oh, that's where it is. That's what I had when I had my raw steak, and that's what we're going to leave it as. Those are just a couple of my tips. Lastly, learn from your scores, but don't judge them. Don't take that too harshly. Like I said, in Collinsville, I know I got a table that scored the whole group's it was ribs a little bit lower. That's just the way it works in competition barbecue. You cannot change that, and that's probably the most frustrating thing. But what I've learned from talking to customers here in the store is I hear a lot of customers and they change things, a lot of things from week to week, and you're never going to be consistent. My goal for this year, we have 2 more comps, is to cook very similarly, use the same seasonings because I've had success with it, and just go with that, and hopefully you're getting on a good judging table and you get good scores. Couple things I changed from comp to comp. My 2 comps this year for KCBS or backyard comps was the first time I dunked my chicken, which I was super happy with. The second time I did not. I just poured it right on, and I wasn't happy with the appearance. I don't think I also thinned my sauce out with a little apple juice. Be consistent. Do the same thing until your scores are landing you in the bottom quarter, or you're noticing something really weird with like taste or tenderness. I wouldn't change anything. Keep going with the same flavor profile. There are dozens of flavor profiles out there that could win from any day to day to day. You go around after the comp, and a lot of people are really generous. You can taste their ribs, you can taste their chicken. It might taste different to you, but it might get a good score, and maybe yours did too, even though they're 2 different tastes. So try not to change up things from week to week. Stay consistent. Like I said, everybody's charcoal could be different. They're cooking on a different, you know, you have a big offset smoker, you have a drum smoker, you have a pellet smoker. They're all getting good results. Don't try to change that up. Brines, I got some Heath Riles, I got some Cosmos, there's Meat Church, there's Butcher Barbecue, lots of different stuff out there. Just because one person won with one thing doesn't mean you can't win with another thing the same week. What I've learned too is, so I've only done 2 backyard comps. I've only done 2. Chicken trimming is something you can completely control. So take your time with it. I know it's frustrating, but that's part of the competition, right? People hate, I don't think I've talked to one person that's like, yeah, I love trimming chicken. But even though appearance is a low portion of your score, it's something that you can really handle and manipulate. So take your time with trimming chicken, go to a class, get online, learn some things. There are lots of ways to do it. You can certainly pick up some tips, and that's something you can control. Our event in Collinsville, I just ran out of time with working and being busy and family, and I ended up trimming my chicken for an hour and a half the night before we left, and I was becoming impatient with it, which is not what you want to be doing when you're trimming chicken. So make sure you have the time. It's certainly, like I said, small part of your score, but you can control that. Lastly, my big disclaimer, I've done 2 backyard cooks, or 2 backyard comps to date. This is not an end-all be-all, but searching YouTube, I didn't see too many things where it was somebody talking about how their comp went and how their experiences were. A lot of videos of like being at the comp, which is great. And maybe this is a really dry video because it's just me sitting here talking. I thought it might be helpful for somebody thinking about competing. Hopefully I'm not boring you to death. You've probably clicked off by this time, but that's fine. Like I said, I have a few SCA events under my belt, but I've talked to lots of people that have come through my store that do pro comps, backyard comps, and SCA comps, and this is kind of a list of what I thought was important and what I've heard from other people too. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you're here still at the end, please subscribe, please share our videos. As always, Anderson Barbecues or AndersonBBQSupply.com online. Right now we're offering free shipping over $50 if this video is still up. Please shop online. You can get all this stuff online except these guys. This is an Amazon purchase. But I hope you found this video interesting. We'll talk to you soon.